Welcome to Fuller Speed Ahead. I'm Craig Fuller here with Dennis Anderson, the Chief Customer Officer of ArcBest. Dennis, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Craig. How are you?
Good. So Chief Customer Officer is a title I don't hear a lot in our industry. What defines your role of responsibility at ArcBest?
Sure. So first of all, thanks for having me on today, Craig, and just excited to get to chat with you. As you said, Chief Customer Officer is a relatively new role, and it's a new role for our company as of this year. And really, I think for our company, it defines our customer focus and really helps emphasize that. But we look at things, from the customer lens, and so we have a customer experience function that I've been part of for the last few years. But then more recently, this year, that role, the Chief Customer Officer, is responsible now for sales, customer service, marketing, really our customer-facing functions, but also has a tie into our company strategy. And so, at our company, we look at the customer to really drive our strategy. And so, I think that's really kind of contained in the Chief Customer Officer role that we have here at ArcBest.
ArcBest is really, over the last decade, has diversified its offerings beyond what most people would have traditionally thought of the ABF operation or the LTL operation. You guys are now in a lot of different markets, whether it's expedite or truck brokerage or just general 3PL services. What is the breadth of the offerings at ArcBest today?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Craig, and something that we're really proud of, and I think something that's really helped us this year in particular. But the breadth of services really cover virtually any kind of logistics offering that a customer would need, from really managing a supply chain to being able to fulfill in different modes like truckload, LTL, air and ocean, you name it. We can do it. And so that's, as you said, we really had our roots. We're almost a 100-year-old company, and we had our roots in the LTL industry with ABF. And really over the last 5 to 10 years, I would say, have really expanded and grown those additional solutions. And so now, ABF represents about 2/3 of our business, and so the other third, roughly, is really these what we call asset light logistics services. So if you hear us talking about that, that's what we're talking about, is really these other services around LTL. But we're very capable, and those services we have the opportunity now to be able to integrate a lot of those services, and that's one of the things that we've noticed that's been really, really important for our customers, is to be able to have those services make sense together and not just work with us in a silo of truckload or in a silo of LTL or even in a silo of ocean or expedite, but to be able to put together unique integrated solutions, because supply chains are different, and so customers need different kinds of solutions and maybe packages of those kinds of solutions together, and we're able to do that.
Now, Dennis, in the role as Chief Customer Officer, are you effectively a czar for your customers, helping them represent their interest and needs and opportunities throughout the organization? Is it very matrix oriented?
It can be. I mean, we have more of a strategy of structure. The structure is not a whole lot different than what you might see, but very, very collaborative across the company with different roles. And as you said, really kind of looking at things from the customer perspective and putting those things together that make sense for the customer. The other thing is to make sure that we're delivering on what we say we're delivering. So when we make a promise to customers, to understand how we're delivering on that promise and how we're impacting their lives. And a lot of times that's pretty difficult for a company to do, especially if we're thinking about our business from our perspective. It's not the same as what a customer is gonna see our business from. So being able to put ourselves in their shoes, empathize with what they're going through, know their supply chain, understand what they're trying to accomplish, and then get that accomplished is a really, really big focus of a chief customer officer and our organization.
Now, disruption has been a relevant and prevalent term throughout 2020. I think everyone across the globe has had some level of disruption in their lives. Certainly businesses that are in the supply chain have faced dealing with their own disruptions and really across their whole business. When you're talking to clients that are in the supply chain, the customers of ArcBest, what is the biggest and most consistent questions or challenges that they're dealing with that they're asking you guys to help them solve?
Well, I think that's a great question, Craig. And first of all, I'd say 2020 I think has redefined the term disruption for most people. And when we're talking to our customers, many of them are dealing with some level of challenge meeting demand, and either that's they've changed how their supply chain works, or they're it might be a retailer that is really leaning into e-commerce right now, which makes a lot of sense. But that creates a lot of challenge within their supply chain, really all the way back upstream and then all the way back into final mile. And so understanding where the demand's coming from and then how much of it from where, I think that's one of the things that we've seen that's been really surprising. Encouraging is the recovery since first part of the second quarter, when I think most people really felt the impact of the shutdowns. But since that time, the discussion's really about where and how much demand is coming back on, and that's not consistent, and that's a real challenge for our customers to deal with, whether they're a retailer dealing with consumers or whether they're back upstream, maybe a vendor dealing with the retailer, knowing what I can't deal with when my orders or when my orders come in, I can't deal with the quantities that I'm being asked. Or in the retail industry, for example, you've seen retailers really dial up the ante on compliance, and so really enforcing a higher standard for compliance for customers. And so it's a challenge, really knowing as things come back and as things have improved from a business level perspective, how to deal with where that demand's coming from, and then how to be able to meet that demand. Especially, we've got an industry that's challenged from a capacity standpoint, and being able to navigate all of those things, I think, and be able to serve customers well. I mean, we're experiencing it as consumers. It's really tough in the logistics space right now. And so what one thing I think that presents, I mean, anytime you get a challenge like that, it really presents an opportunity, because when you look at the value of logistics, it's never been greater, and never been greater for us as logistics practitioners. The value of being able to deliver on promises is huge right now. And so I think that's really driving a lot of the questioning is just, how am I going to be able to serve this demand that's coming from places that I've never seen before, maybe, or it's creating a pull from areas of my supply chain that I haven't been as invested in before. So I really need to understand it. So a lot of the historical modeling or the the look back in history is just really difficult to rely on. And so that's when it's important, that you have a partner that's really looking forward and being able to understand what kind of options there are, and being flexible and nimble. And I think that's one of the things we talked earlier about the capabilities that our company has. We've been able to be in conversations this year with customers and about their challenges and solving those challenges that I don't think we would have been in 10 or even 5 years ago. So that's encouraging. But I would say, to answer your question most directly, it's really about, how do I serve this demand, and then how do I configure my supply chain to really be as nimble as possible and as flexible as possible, because I don't know where it's coming from and I can't rely on history.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned history. There's been, before COVID and perhaps the very first part of it, it's this interesting dialogue around historical data versus sort of real-time market data. Our argument's been that you want the fastest, most relevant information in the market, and I think COVID sort of reset everything. It sort of changed how we operate. Volatility has always been a factor in our industry. Even before COVID, that was accelerating. There was a lot more volatility. These cycles were very deep on the upside and very deep on the downside. What is your take on volatility? Is it a permanent fixture in our industry? Is it going to accelerate? What is your thoughts on what's happening around the supply chain industry?
Yeah, Craig, that's a great observation, and I think volatility is something that we always complain about when it happens, but it's something that if you do look back at that history, it's not ever not been there. So just our industry in general is very cyclical, but as you mentioned, especially this year, those cycles tend to get deeper, and so I think my view, and I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it's best to be prepared for volatility, because that's just, you don't know when the next pandemic, hopefully never, but when the next pandemic might hit, or something like it that really causes a shock. And I think that's one thing that another thing that's emerged this year is this discussion of just in time supply chains, and those don't deal with volatility very well. And when you look at the future and think about volatility being there, I mean, we've heard some discussion about, well, do we need to increase safety stock, or we need to think more about how our supply chain is laid out and not make it so lean, which that's been lean has been a principle in supply chains for decades. And so I think it really is, the volatility is causing people to think differently about how they structure things and about how they partner with different supply chain providers, and then just having flexibility, because when things are volatile, you're not going to be able to pull your normal levers to get product moved. And so I think just being prepared for that volatility involves being flexible and really just having a lot of options at your table, which probably requires a little bit more investment than you would have made in a lean type environment. And so I think that's something that as we move into 2021 and then think about the next few years, that supply chain managers are really going to have to consider and really think about, because they're having to make cases to their C-suites about supply chains and investment in supply chain. And so I think this year definitely has served as a wake-up call on just what volatility can do, and then the risk that it can put to a supply chain, but then also the risk that a supply chain can put to a business if that volatility is not prepared for.
Yeah, I would imagine you're getting invited into a lot deeper and higher level conversations across the organizations, because supply chain is cool all of a sudden. It's important all of a sudden. And I think the people that have been managing through this process often are taken for granted inside their organizations, inside their shippers. And now that seems to be emerging. I mean, I watched the vaccine roll out. I talked about this earlier, where I watched the vaccine roll out, and it seemed like we were almost heroic. This was our D-Day moment for our generation. And it was really awesome to see on national media where the trucks were rolling out, the planes were taking off, and you just felt like this was our moment to really shine. What are you seeing in terms of how supply chain professionals are being engaged in their organization? Is this making it to the C-suite? Are you getting invited to have conversations with executive management about what's happening beyond folks that are typically involved in it?
Absolutely, Craig. I think, when we look at, first of all, I totally agree with you. It's really exciting and gratifying to see professionals that in the supply chain industry that have worked for, in many cases, decades on these things that are thankless in a lot of organizations, and then to see that celebrated when it matters, and when the chips are down, and to see those folks really rising to the occasion, that's just exciting. And I applaud everyone that's working through that right now. But I think you're right. I mean, supply chain has never been more relevant, and so supply chain leadership is really getting a lot of focus from that C-suite. And I would say, this year, absolutely, we've been in more conversations with the higher levels of the organization than we ever have. And I think it's, from customer examples where it's their first time to be talking to a logistics company to manage anything for them. Normally, they've had all direct relationships with carriers and kind of approached it from a DIY perspective. But having their C-suite in a conversation and say, how can a logistics company really help us be strategic about what we're doing here? And so that's been really, really gratifying, because it's an attention getter with the business when you understand how much supply chain is a competitive weapon in business. And so that has been really, really exciting, really, really gratifying. I think that changes the game. It changes, I think, our relationships with shippers going forward. I think permanently. It's a totally different conversation when leaders of companies really understand what supply chain does for them in their business, and what the risk that it poses for them if they're not paying attention to it. And so, and I think, unfortunately, a lot of times it takes the risk and the downside to really get attention. But that's happened this year. But either way, it's great to be in that conversation, and I think it's great for the supply chain professionals in those companies that maybe haven't received that recognition ever, but are in those conversations now with their C-suite.
I mean, it's often, I use the comparison of electricity. I don't think about my power company until the power's off. And then I'm really thankful that when they come out, we have a really good local utility here in Chattanooga called EPB, and they serve our internet as well. And I'm just thankful, because I was at my mother-in-law's house up in New Jersey, and the internet, they had, I think, Verizon or something, and it was just horrific. And when you call them because there's a problem, they're like, well, you need to reset your modem, versus they'll show up here. And so I think that's the same case in supply chain, is that people don't think about it until it becomes important, and things do break down. There's been a lot of conversation, and historically supply chain has been viewed as a cost center and a way to optimize out expenses, which us in the industry, as providers in the industry, hate, because it means that we become a commodity. Are you seeing that change in how people are approaching their budget? Are they building more flexibility? Are they empowering folks that are in those decisions to perhaps buy a higher quality provider versus the lowest and cheapest guy on the routing guide? Or girl, for that matter?
I think that a little bit of that is changing. I mean, I think there will always be cost pressure. No, I don't see a day where that all of a sudden just take as much investment as you want and go get it done happens. Some companies, that's where the cost of failure is just greater than the cost of anything. That might be the case, but I do see there's still a cost conversation, but I think there's a better conversation in that people, as I said before, really are recognizing supply chain as a competitive weapon. And when you look at it that way, it's similar to what's happened, I think, with technology over the last few years. Because a lot of companies have looked at technology as a budget line item, and percent of revenue, or whatever benchmark they're looking at to look at technology cost. And people have realized that when they make the right investments in technology, they can really do some exciting things competitively. And I think that's what you're seeing in supply chain. And maybe some of that is very early innings conversation, but definitely when you look at it as a risk or a cost that you just have to deal with, that's one perspective. But really, when you look at turning it around into that competitive weapon, I think that really is leading to different kinds of conversations that we're in this year. And so that's really exciting. And I think as people look ahead, kind of turn the page to what's next, it's not a new normal, it's just what's next. I think that is definitely something that we're starting to hear companies view supply chain as is really more of a competitive weapon than a cost center.
Yeah, it seems like if I'm responsible for freight movement or helping manage a company's supply chain, and then I've got to go in front of the CFO because something's happened, or the chief sales officer, commercial officer, retail officer, whatever the role is, or the CEO for that matter, and I have to go in front of them and explain what's happened. I would want people like yourself around me that can talk about context across a very large ecosystem, not just because you're the cheapest guy. I wouldn't want to have that conversation because I chose the cheapest person. It's the old adage, nobody gets fired for buying IBM. I think that's also true in these situations where something as critical, it's important to have folks that you can talk intelligently about what's happening. They become a resource in many ways.
That's exactly right, and that's the way that we talk to our people about engaging with customers. We're there to be a trusted advisor for them, and somebody that can really help them navigate those kinds of conversations within their organization. Because I think that's really important. An important part of what I talked about earlier, stepping in the customer's shoes, and you know, those supply chain managers, they have a job to do every day, and being able to report to their C-suite effectively is something that we can really help with, because we understand broader industry dynamics. And you know, what's going on in our industry is not contained to a single mode. I mean, the impacts of this year have been really broad. And I think we were on a customer conversation a few days ago, and just reflecting on the types of impacts, the breadth of impacts, and really going mode by mode and thinking about how each mode has really been impacted through this pandemic. And it's difficult to try to absorb all of that and understand all of that. And so, you know, I think it is important to have strategic partnerships that allow you to you know, come together with those organizations and you know, provide a better picture of what's going on so that you can make smarter investment.
All right, Dennis, I always ask folks, put you on the spot a bit. Predictions for next year. How much of this volume that we're all seeing across the industry is persistently going to stay? Or how much of it is going to go away when people resume events and activities? Do you think this is a permanent shift in how consumers consume goods? Or do you think we're going to see a slowing of volume in the industry?
That's a great question, Craig. And I think you know, when we look at all the indicators that we look at, there definitely seems to be some legs for some period of time, even on the demand pieces of this. I mean, for us, you know, we look at the industrial economy quite a bit. We also look at retail inventories. Those things tend to indicate that there's some runway here. You know, as I said before, it's dangerous to look at history and try to predict these things, but those are encouraging signs as we look at those kinds of indicators. You know, I think it really does come down to how consumer behavior ultimately settles out here. I mean, there's been a lot of debate about you know, continued consumer spending on goods versus a reversion to spending on services. You know, and I think that's a great debate to have. But I think when you look at, you know, where we're at as we progress through 2021, at least, it's you know, the indicators that we look at really even look at restocking of a lot of the goods that have come out. The other thing that's happening is the housing market is really in a different place than it's ever been, and very hot right now, I think nationwide. And so, you know, people have looked around at their homes during the pandemic and during quarantine and said, you know, I think if I'm going to have to do a work from home setup, or if I'm going to have to be in this place 24/7, then I think I'm going to have what I want. And so, looking around for different ways to move. So I think the story is yet to be told on exactly how much this changes our lives, but it does seem to be an event that impacts a consumer psyche longer term. That would be my thought on how that comes together. But you know, looking at 2021, we're encouraged by the indicators right now on what that means just from a demand perspective. But it really will be interesting to see how that impact on the consumer psyche plays out over time.
Is deorbitization a factor in all of this? I think about I'm big on Twitter, but so a lot of the folks that I follow are venture capitalists and technology startup founders that are in the Valley and Silicon Valley that are leaving, going to places like Miami and Austin, Texas. But I also have family from New York, and most people I know have left the city. But is that a factor across the country? Are we seeing sort of a reemergence of suburbia across it and more rural markets? Have you guys seen a shift in volume across your network?
It sure seems that way. I mean, I would be hard pressed to give you hard numbers on how that shift is happening at this point. But definitely you hear more anecdotes every day about things of that nature, either figures that you know of, businesses relocating. I mean, I think people are taking advantage of being able to work anywhere. That's one thing. But then also, you have some discussion. I think there was some discussion over the weekend about Elon Musk relocating from California to Texas, and so those are kinds of things that again, this is an event that really causes people to step back and just think about their entire existence and what it means and where they want to be, and so. I do think that that's causing some people to think through that, and I think anecdotally that what I'm hearing is consistent with what you're saying. There's a shift from urbanization to deurbanization for sure.
Yeah, it seems so. Tesla, Oracle, and HP have all left to Texas in the last week, or have announced moving their headquarters, which certainly doesn't bode well for just the sentiment of California. Like I said, New York has suffered it. It's a really interesting time what's happening. We're all having to deal with it in our own lives, but it does open up new opportunities. Dennis, I really appreciate you coming on, being a part of the conversation. How can people best reach you if they wanted to reach out and have a conversation about how ArcBest could help them, or just get your thoughts on what's happening?
Absolutely. You can check us out. Our website is arcb.com. That's arcb.com. You can check us out there. There are several ways to contact us through there. You can check us out on our socials as well. ArcBest is on pretty much every social channel that you can find. And look me up on LinkedIn. I'm out there as well. So it's great to be with you today, Craig, and really appreciate you having me on.
Thanks, Dennis. Thank you for everything, and best of luck finishing out the year.
Thanks a lot, Craig. Take care.